Well, welcome everyone to the third session of education sessions this summer in our sort of summer discussion group in 2025. And we are the K-State YDSA. Today we are discussing the ABCs of Socialism. It's a book produced by Jacobin magazine, and they put together, I think, a pretty good selection of essays that are really accessible and approachable for learning how to defend socialism against the common arguments that a lot of capitalists, conservatives, and reactionaries will make against socialism. Now, have they invented new arguments since 1848? If you watched our first session, then obviously no. Or if you were here and talking about the manifesto, not many of their arguments have changed. But it does mean that as socialism develops as a science and as theory, as practice, we do get to develop our arguments and get to defend them a little bit differently as time goes on. So hopefully today, as we're having discussions and you're listening, we get to develop ourselves as socialists and our ability to defend it both in regular conversation as well as potentially online or even while tabling or in the organization. The key is that we want to foster healthy and democratic debate. We want to make sure that everyone feels the opportunity that they have not only the right foundation of socialist knowledge, but also the ability to think beyond that and use those tools to apply it to new situations. That's why it's really important that we know how to defend the basic tenets of socialism so that when we're faced with new situations, it's not that hard to respond, especially when things are changing in the world so often. Okay, so let me share my screen. And everyone has already clicked on the link for Nearpod. I'm going to use this in the next session where we do ABCs of Socialism too, if this all goes well. So just let me know if that's the case. Also, if you hear excessive barking in the background, let me know so that I can take care of that.
Don't kill your dog.
No, oh my God. He's just an anxious boy, and I have to let him know that it is not barking time. He's probably a little anxious because we didn't get a chance to go on a walk earlier, but that's okay. He'll be okay. He'll get a walk after this. So
Yeah, I know that guy. That guy's Richard Wolff.
okay, that should all be fixed now. Maybe not.
I can't hear a dog barking. Just
okay. If you can't, then I'll just continue.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome everyone. Like I was saying, make sure that you click the link in the general chat for the Nearpod. That is how you'll access all of the stuff that I am showing much easier. And please do let me know if the barking actually comes through on the microphone. Okay. So the first claim that is broadly made by conservatives and reactionaries, because they generally don't understand socialism, is socialism is when the government does stuff. Here we go. This is Richard Wolff, absolute paragon of this subject.
Socialism is when the government does stuff. And it's more socialism the more stuff it does. And if it does a real lot of stuff, it's communism.
So there you go. Socialism is when the government does stuff. Now, I wanted to, before we kind of get into the real discussion of this claim, first off, how was the reading? So I know that this is one of the claims in the first few chapters of the book, and I took an excerpt and added some annotations. How did we feel about reading these sections? Was there anything that immediately jumped out at you, or what was the vibe of the reading this week compared to maybe other weeks?
I thought it was definitely the easiest reading we've had. Like you mentioned earlier, it's stuff that I feel like most of us already know. Um, Other than that, I found myself generally agreeing with it. I thought your annotations, Daniel, were good, and I also thought that the reading was funny, which was cool. Like especially the private property versus personal property section was my favorite. That one was funny. But yeah, I just thought it was good reading.
Anyone else want to share some interesting things they found in the reading, or things they wanted to comment just about the reading generally?
My favorite part of the reading was when the author was like, some people say that J.K. Rowling should be allowed to keep Harry Potter for herself because she's just so smart. And I was like, reading that, it's like J.K. Rowling writing Harry Potter is more of a reason I want communism.
That's great. I think what y'all are saying kind of highlights the fact, what I was trying to get at is that the ABCs of socialism, while there are some flaws like any leftist sort of critique, right, that exists, there are some flaws with the essays, or at least there's some shortcuts being made here and there. But I think broadly it's an extremely accessible and funny, easy to understand document. And a lot of the people who are writing in this are actually really good, like speakers, lecturers, professors who have written quite a bit on socialism, especially in like kind of the public. So they may not be the most like academic or like theory born leftists that you've ever met, but these are people who have real conversations about socialism in the real world and might be good names to check out. For example, Eric Olin Wright has written a bunch of books and given a bunch of talks and is a decently well-known kind of socialist in political thought, not unlike Richard Wolff, who didn't write in ABCs of Socialism, but as you just saw, demonstrated the claim that socialism is when the government does stuff. He is quite popular online. So I just wanted to address the reading and thank you all for doing that. What about the videos? Did we get through the videos well enough?
I watched like the first set of videos.
Uh-huh.
And then
there was one about Engels, and then one last one about technically Aristotle and his ideas on debating and then speaking.
Yeah, I watched the Engels ones, and
okay.
I got like halfway through the Engels one. Is this? I was like kind of in two minds. I was like, on one hand, I was like, I've heard all of this before, and on the other hand, I was like, is this?
So. Yeah. Sarah, did you have a similar experience with the videos, or did you have something different?
Yeah, I watched all of them except the last one, the discussing socialism one. I did not watch that. I thought they were good videos. The modern labor theory of value, that kind of went over my head just a little bit.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, I thought they were good.
Yeah.
Sam, William.
Yeah, I was watching the Engels one, and then I saw Hakeem released a video on Haiti, and then I got distracted when I went to that. And then I eventually came back to it, so.
Cool. Mikey?
The response to their critiques of the labor theory of value is just obviously I understand the labor or the theory of value, but and then the response to the critiques, I just didn't even understand the critiques, so I was just like, what's going on here? It's kind of hard to be like, what do these economists who I don't care about, what are they saying? And then what is the response to that critique that I don't really care about?
Yeah, and I hope we'll be able to bring some of that down to earth in this discussion. So that's why I started with this. Socialism is when the government does stuff. This is like common online Reddit answer to when you say socialism. They just be like either because the ABCs of Socialism chapter is, wait, isn't America a little bit socialist already? The answer is very obviously no. But there are a couple of things that we can discuss first. So first off is I want everybody to, join in. This is an open discussion. This is not like everyone has to go around the room and answer the question. But if you do have an answer, that'd be great. The question is, do Democrat or Republican policies fundamentally decrease the power of capital? When I say power, I mean like social power, political power, even economic power. Do they fundamentally decrease the power of capital in our society? And particularly why? You can't just say yes or no. You got to explain it.
I love talking about this. No, they essentially anytime you see them give something up, right, a little bit of appeasement to us, there's always something that they'll give back, right? So it'll be, oh well, we're doing we're taking, we're breaking this up, but then we're gonna give this guy a tax break or something like this, etc. And then this guy's gonna get $1 trillion now. So always some subsidies will come through, etc. That's just completely harmful, right? They still benefit the capitalists. It'll essentially be, okay, well, look, we're taking this away from them, but now this guy's got that, behind the back. Pork filling bills and all that.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would go ahead and say no to this question because the interests of policymakers are like so tied up with the interests of capital. Like the one that stuck with me the most, I think the reading gave like a couple different reasons why, but one of them was that if the economy is doing bad, then the government has less money to do its things. So they obviously want to keep the capitalists happy so that they can continue to, you know, have the government running. And also, like, there's a lot of influence that a lot of powerful companies have, stuff like that. So my answer is no.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
I would like to give another example. I think of this particularly in like the housing. Whenever people talk about housing, they're always like, the like policy response is always like, we're going to subsidize private developers to make affordable housing, and not like the government is just gonna build housing and then they're just gonna give it to people. There's always has to be a private company as a middleman in every government operation. That's like the handout capital in the midst of like maybe doing something that would benefit people.
Yeah. So I really liked a lot of those answers, and there might be one in the chat. One second. Yeah, that's all good, Nick. But there's a single piece of legislation that could have decreased power, would have been the PRO Act back in 2020, or the Right to Organize Act, which strengthens union power. I've actually been reading a lot about both of those acts recently. For those who may not know, the PRO Act is an act that essentially punishes companies for trying to prevent unionization and also expands what is considered labor and what is considered work by a company, which allows more people to organize, especially if they've been reclassified as things like independent contractors and such, in order to avoid them being considered regular employees, in order to restrict their organizing power. The Right to Organize Act does the similar thing, and I think that one specifically abolishes, so does the PRO Act, but I think that one is like more focused on abolishing right to work states, where it would abolish the notion that a state could regulate whether or not you join a company because they have a union. So right to work states say that you don't have to pay union dues because you join a job like, say, acting or teaching, and the union requires you pay dues to work at that workplace. That's not allowed in those states. This act would reverse that. So yeah, those are some great examples how I mean, there's also a left critique that I'll levy as well. The PRO Act and the Right to Organize Act also assume that labor power and labor organizing must come to the same table as companies and business owners in particular, that while they may expand union power, they still want union conversations to be in the context of conversations with individual businesses or individual business owners. They aren't trying to have conversations about economy-wide restructuring or have workers have power over redistribution or things like that, or let alone company decisions. Those acts and those amendments have largely failed. So those are some good evidence. Another question that's commonly asked about the question of like, oh, well, socialism is when the government does stuff. They will often cite California as a great example of socialism at work, that Governor Newsom is this like paragon of socialist thought. Can anyone tell me why that's like maybe a bad, or bad faith way of arguing, and why that's probably not true?
I'm just gonna say that California has had like a bajillion governors since they've been saying this, and for some reason it's always socialist. So like, what's going on there?
Exactly. Yeah. Comrade Newsom, the vanguard of the revolution, of course. Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that in these moments, right, that just because they are Democrats, just because they claim themselves to be on the left, does not mean necessarily that they are doing something progressive and genuinely transforming the power of capital. That's why we have to do things like class analysis in order to respond. And so when we're thinking about defending this claim against the, socialism is when the government does stuff, we have to remember that for many of these people, they understand socialism as the caricature made in their mind. So we are not attacking, or like at least they are not attacking the real existence of socialism or communist movements. They are attacking this imagination that they have about these things and then moving forward and responding. So in order to respond to that straw man, you have to kind of show the absurdity in the argument. For example, is it socialism to have driver's licenses? Yes, some libertarians say so. Is it socialism to have marriage licenses? I don't think libertarians would say that. I'm not exactly sure, but they would probably say that for non-traditional marriages in their interpretation. Anyway, I'm getting a bit off track, but I hope everyone understands that obviously this is a bad argument. Now, this is where I think probably some of the more heated debate might happen. Do you think Scandinavian countries, this includes like Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, these kinds of places, do you think these Scandinavian countries are socialist? If so, why? If not, why not? And here's a meme to help you center your thoughts.
No.
Yeah,
Sam
no.
says no. Sarah says no. Why? Why?
Well, okay,
Oh,
yes,
there
I mean, I don't really know anything about these four countries, but I'm gonna take a guess and say they have more social programs than we do, but that doesn't make them socialist because they're still a class being exploited by an upper class. They still have like policemen, like they're not socialist just because they have healthcare, is what I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I'm like, I feel like I would have heard of their revolutionary struggle against capitalism if so, but apparently not.
Well, these countries don't define themselves as socialist either. They've got their own exploitation class. They still exploit the like oil. Oil is still very exploited. Indigenous people in Finland are exploited still, believe it or not. There's exploitation in terms of, say, Spotify and other, very high up companies of like artists, etc., or anything else really exploiting. So yeah, they're still exploiting like the global south and other industries. So very, very exploitive in terms of like labor rights. They don't even have a minimum wage from what I know, etc. Like there's still ways to go in terms of labor rights, even if they may have like some social programs that people like that might be common sense. Doesn't change the fact that they're still exploitive by nature.
Yeah, I'll highlight that for a moment. Finland has a greater than 80% unionization rate, and they have lots and lots of social programs and are often heralded as the happiest country in the world, which is all true. And they have made great strides in making people have access to more resources or ability to kind of survive, right? But people still work under a wage capitalist system, right? They still work for a wage. They do not own the means of production. The interests of the working class are not the dominant form of society. And instead, we are looking at a society that has largely also plenty of contradictions, right? They have problems of harming indigenous folks, exploiting other nations, and such. They are also the heads of lots of internationalist, like capitalist organizations, like the IMF and humanitarian organizations in the UN that exploit the global South. So why is it that they would do all of that stuff if they were truly socialist and so good at creating all of these social programs? Like, why is it that social programs are not socialism, or at least do not create socialism on their own? Why is that?
Profit.
Yeah, the profit motive is one. Is there another reason why social programs on their own are not necessarily like socialist?
Because there's still this assumption that working people aren't like, as I posted on a Chapman Center Facebook page today, that there's this assumption that working people aren't taking the power. They're not doing them for things for themselves. They're being given things by the bourgeois and the bourgeois government. They're, after the bourgeois have made all their money on the backs of working people, then they might deign to give them a little bit of a free healthcare. It's not that it's in the hands of it does benefit people, obviously, but it's not in their hands whether or not it is benefit. And obviously, we can see in the U.S. that these social programs are liable to be rolled back at a moment's notice. So
Yeah, I'll highlight that out of every socialist experiment that's ever been named, the USSR, Cuba, Venezuela, China, and more, every single one of them has begun with a large program. I mean, we even read this in the manifesto back in 1848. The first iterations of like what Marxist thought was included a 10-point program for developing social programs for the populace. Now, were those inherently socialist? In the sense that they were directly within a package aimed at destroying the power of the propertied class, the bourgeois class, yes. But in the context of a capitalist class, where, say, for example, your high wages are now utilized to buy consumer goods and to keep you in that cycle, that's capitalist, not socialist. The notion of like healthcare being provided by the government as a negotiation with health companies. So, for example, there's plenty of like competition in the pharmaceutical market or in these markets for healthcare. It's just that the government is the negotiator as opposed to individuals. While that may be a transition away from the larger part of capitalist power within the pharmaceutical industry, that doesn't mean that workers fundamentally are, the dominant social group. Okay, I think we all get that and we can probably move on. Okay, the next claim in the book, or well, the claim that's being responded to, is that the best capitalism is free and democratic. Now, can anyone here make an argument for me? Just play the devil's advocate. What do conservatives, capitalists, and reactionaries mean when they say that capitalism can be very free and democratic? What do they mean?
They'll probably be, usually it's about economic freedom. So like, oh, you have the option. If you want to spend your money on this, go spend your money on that. And you could quit your job and all that. And basically, boycotts, etc. Well, they want to shut the boycotts down, so maybe not that. But yeah, they basically see it as you have the right to, oh, you could quit your job and you could go work somewhere else. You could buy this instead of that. So it's just economic freedom, or economic freedom in quotations, of course.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anyone else? Any other like what is a the like most good faith interpretation you can have of the conservative argument that capitalism can be absolutely free and democratic.
Guys. Um, I feel like this is kind of clouded by the fact that capitalists, or not even like capitalists, just like people who are anti-communist, because it's not like always rich people who say this, but that they conflate communism with like this dictatorship, authoritarian thing. So they're like, communism inevitably comes with political repression, even if, and they don't really make an argument that like the economic system causes political repression, or that the economic system, like the economic conditions, cause political repression, because like they're not materialists. But I would say that they would be like, well, capitalism is more free because because the bourgeois have freedom. You can open a business and you can exploit all the people you want, and that's the headspace people are in. Even if I don't think they say that, but I don't know.
I think you're identifying, Mikey, that like from your perspective through a class analysis, it's almost impossible not to see the claim as just, well, of course capitalism is free because the bourgeois are free, as opposed to the workers who are not until they become bourgeois and then they become free. Yeah, and that's totally fair. And that's the thing is like many
touch with the capitalist mindset right there.
Well, can you just think of an example like what Elon Musk defenders, right? Musk stands are probably the most obvious example of this claim, where they're like, oh, capitalism is so free and democratic. Yeah, they're geniuses, right? Capitalism produces innovation. Those kinds of things are all tied to this claim that capitalism allows people to like permits, by the way, want to be clear, permits people to think freely and openly associate, whether that be politically, economically, or socially. The pick yourself up by your bootstraps, which was originally a critique of conservative reactionary commentary, and now has turned into an actual slogan of conservatives and reactionaries, is literally a notion that like individuals can freely associate within the economy and build themselves up to be a member of the bourgeois class and always seek that position. So that's like the broad overview, but I have a few discussion questions that I'm just going to open up to the floor, and when there's a significant pause, we'll go ahead and move on to the next. So first is there's a claim made by Eric Olin Wright out of the like 5 or 6 main claims that he makes, is that the 9-to-5 schedule is tyranny. Is the 9-to-5 schedule actually tyranny? Why or why not?
I think the claim is like a little hyperbolic, but in essence, it's true. Like you go to your 9-to-5 and then somebody tells you what to do all day and then you go home. You don't really have that much freedom. And I mean, some workplaces, sure, they give their workers freedom to like do certain tasks, but like at the end of the day, you are doing your job because somebody told you what to do. You're not really like making your own decisions on how the work gets done.
Oh, but Sarah, forgive me. I thought you chose to work there.
Yeah, or well, as this meme that you have up here, if I didn't choose to work here, I wouldn't eat. So
fair enough.
I mean, I don't think it has to be tyranny, because like socialism will also have schedules. Like if you want to get anything done, you're gonna have people in a place at a specific time. So
but yeah, but like at your 9-to-5, you don't like have the term, like you don't have the you don't have, oh my god, what am I trying to say? You don't own like the means of your labor. Like you would have way more freedom in socialism.
And like I think it obviously pays, but I don't think that like like people have jobs under socialism, so you know, there is going to be constraints. Like there is going to be constraints on your like personal individual freedom, as in like your freedom, in order for the collective good. But like there's already constraints on your personal freedom in capitalism. But it's just like in service of capital instead of like in service of people. But I will say I've been cooking up a theory for years and years and years. I've just been like, we just like privileged like the 9 to 5, the specific set of time that is the 9 to 5 so heavily in society, and like discriminate against people who work at any other time. It's very serious. Very serious form of discrimination right there.
So, well, that's the other thing is like, okay, Sarah, you say that maybe the tyranny part is hyperbolic, and some of y'all mentioned like there's some more beneficial schedules or possible benefits you might get at work. So like what might make you hesitant to say that 9 to 5 is tyranny? And this is, by the way, not me saying like I totally agree with the way that Eric is portraying this, but I'm just curious, like why is it that, we're not going to call the 9 to 5 always tyranny?
One moment while I pull up the Webster definition of tyranny.
By all means. That's part of this, and I appreciate that, because that's, I'm trying to spur like, a lot of discussion and thought, because when someone comes up to us and is like, see, I told you, I love my 9 to 5, it's like you have to be very responsive quite quickly to people's emotions and a lot of preconceived programming and propaganda that they have known since they were quite young.
Well,
okay.
go
So,
ahead.
oh, sorry. Tyranny can either mean just like unjust or oppressive governmental power, or a government in which a single ruler is invested with absolute power. So depending on your definition, like if you're just saying that it's oppressive, then sure, you can call a 9 to 5 tyranny, but like your boss does not have like absolute power over what you're doing. Like you can quit. Like this is true. But which is why I say it's a bit of an exaggeration. Like, but yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
what were you gonna say?
I'm cool. Hang on.
It's all good. Is that your grill burger as well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
So essentially, right? Ask somebody, if you love your 9 to 5 so much, would you do it for free? They don't love their 9 to 5. They love the money they get from it and the benefits that they don't starve.
Yeah, that's a decent point. The last thing that I wanted to point out here on that question is just, I think that capitalists mean well when they say that, and a lot of people, even like particularly liberals or those who might be consider themselves on the left, they do probably like the people at their job, and they probably think that it is a free choice for them to work at McDonald's or Subway or otherwise. But oftentimes they don't recognize their own privilege in that. Some people can just choose to be unemployed and choose to do so, but many others cannot. And so we do have to consider that, especially as socialists. Like that's part of the moral argument for socialism, is just like capitalism sucks for most people, and that's immoral, that's bad, and we should not do that. So that's the one way you can kind of check back on it as a pretty quick response. The next question I had is, can governments choose not to serve the interests of capitalists? So this is referencing Eric Olin Wright's like bottom part of the essay, where he talks about like the legislature and policymaking and how it's in capitalist interests. And I know we talked about that before, but are there examples where the government can choose to not serve the interests of capitalists? If so, why would they do that?
I don't know if it's going to be controversial to say this, but I don't think China really serves the interests of the capitalists as much as they're perceived to do. Because China has a very strict anti-corruption policy, right? They basically put the capitalists in line with the party, right? So Jack Ma, corrupt individual, decides he's gonna, step up and basically criticize the party and look for like exploitation. They quickly put him in line. etc. So they put the capitalists pretty much in line, this billionaire class in China quickly. And they're not afraid to execute them too. Same could be said for Cuba and like other places. Now that's maybe sounds insane to say, but they do have a very, very strict anti-corruption outlook.
Okay.
I was thinking of the current situation we're in, where like the capitalist class has been like, no, Trump, you can't. Your like deportations are hurting our bottom line, and your tariffs are hurting our bottom line. So like, you'll do what we want and not this nonsense that we didn't elect you for. So it kind of like shows how like even like a very right wing government is still the people who are actually pulling the strings are capitalists. Even though you would think he would be aligned with them on like every single thing. He can't just like choose to ignore them, or they would like do a coup, I assume.
Yeah. Or just elect a Democrat. Sure. Sarah, did you have another thought on that?
Well, your original question included why would governments like serve the working class? I mean, one obvious reason is for votes, for so people would like them. I mean, yeah. If you have everybody hating you, who would vote for you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Cuomo's found a pretty good way to try to do it, but other than that, I get that. Yeah. No, that's fair. And it's like I think Eric is you might be right in identifying that Eric is doing a lot in his work to be somewhat hyperbolic about the way that he's talking, so much so that I even wrote in an annotation saying like, this may sound conspiratorial, but I promise it is not, because he's doing like real material analysis here. The big difference I want to draw is that there's a difference between people being rationally convinced of an irrational thing and just making irrational connections. So what I mean by this is that when Eric is talking about how like, legislators and the government is so beholden to capitalism that is like seemingly insurmountable, and talks about tyranny of the 9 to 5. And, we've also mentioned here that it's actually very rare for a government to capitulate to the demands of workers. These are all things that are evidence of a material reality that we should be able to see and predict and respond to accordingly. So since we know that lobbying controls a lot of government, we should know that if that is true, if the rich control our interests, then the interests of the rich will always necessarily trump the interests of the non-rich. And that is true. There's actual surveys out there that demonstrate that for corporate donors and their interests, it is linear. If they don't support something, it doesn't get passed. I think it's like the minimum is like 10%. There's like a 10% chance it could get passed if they don't like it. And then the top end is literally like near 100%. If they like it, then it gets passed. Whereas if you look at the line for, and I think this was like a Pew Research study or New York Times did this a long time ago. You can Google it all you want. This like 30% number is pretty popular. It's that no matter what number of people support a thing, like across the masses, only 30% of the time it actually passes. So if they hate it, then it gets passed 30% of the time. If they love it, then it gets passed 30% of the time. It's just complete flat line across all support, which would initially be boggling, but it proves the material reality of the hypothesis we set out. If corporate interests control legislation, then we would see corporate interests dominate what gets passed. Guess what? Corporate interests dominate what gets passed. So that's a good explication for it. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because I think it's really important for understanding the American context, is this question: is voting with your dollar good for democracy? Can that do something positive for democracy? Can it do something negative for democracy? Tell me about that.
I can't outvote Elon Musk, so it's not really democratic.
What do you mean voting with your dollar? What do you mean?
So there's a common like notion that capitalists often forward that talks about how, well, part of your freedom and your democracy is not just your vote at the ballot box, but also like where you spend your money or where you go to work and those kinds of things. Also, Citizens United is based on this concept, right? The Supreme Court case, Citizens United, determined that literally that spending money is speech, is free speech that is protected by the Constitution, which means that corporations as people have the right to spend money and therefore the right to speak, which is why super PACs can be hidden and those kinds of things. So essentially, voting with your dollars is the notion that you have democracy through the economy. This is also based on just like markets are really good because they organize our infinite wants according to like the limited material. So the notion is that because you have money that you can spend on things, your choice, your individual choice to spend money on one thing as opposed to another, necessarily changes what can happen in the economy. So if nobody bought a certain product, then that product would go out of the market. If nobody gave money to a campaign, that campaign will fail. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, I
Okay.
have a fervent hatred of this argument so much.
Yeah.
Just because it like goes up all the fucking time. And it's like constantly, you see it a lot. And it's like when people are like, you shouldn't buy from this company because they're homophobic or because they're, they have terrible labor practices. And I'm just like, that's like every company. You're saying I just shouldn't buy anything. So, people will be like, you shouldn't buy it. You should do XYZ instead of this, as if like the thing they're criticizing it for isn't like a systemic issue in capitalism, and that's the problem. So it's like people who are like, they've just realized that like there are problems with companies, but it's not really, and obviously if a dollar is a vote, people with less dollars have less votes. This is capitalism. This is a limitation of your freedom by capitalism.
Yeah, Nick brings up this point, and I wanted to read it out loud. Is the BDS boycotts, boycott, divest, sanction boycotts have been successful in getting some brands pulled from shelves. So this is an example potentially of the dollar economy and like voting with your dollars actually being successful. Another good example is like how the BDS movement has successfully gotten people disinvested from Israel or divested from Israel by like rejecting bond proposals and things like that. Oh my gosh, it's almost in the name or something. But yeah, it's so, it's these kinds of examples where voting with your dollars is used by socialist led movements, because largely the BDS movement is a grassroots socialist movement, in my opinion, that it has been a tactic before. So there's some level of like democracy there. But I think the fundamental point that Eric is getting at and that others are getting at is that, and you all have mentioned, that no matter what, at the end of the day, even if some policies are good and get passed, even if some companies divest, even if some, schools divest or, go away, that won't matter for the fact that we are still under this system of capitalism and it is still going to find a new way to exploit us. Okay. Are there any questions about this claim? Because sometimes it can be a bit nebulous, sometimes it can be hidden. Do we have any questions about that? Okay. So the next segment is a question. We're going to skip that one. No, we'll do it. We'll do it. So everyone who's got the app on their phone or the link pulled up, you can submit an answer to this and then it comes up anonymously. And so you can just submit your answer, it'll come up, and then I can kind of like look through and read them. So this is your view, by the way. I will switch over to my view in a moment. I just don't want y'all seeing the stuff.
Shit wants us to draw. Fuck.
Things.
The question is, by comparison, write an example of two of undemocratic things a government can do. Basically, give me some examples of some undemocratic shit. Okay, I'm gonna pause the share so that I can look at the answers.
Sorry.
I can see what y'all have in progress. This is great. Like while you are drawing it, I can see it. Thanks, Mikey. Yeah, that's one. That's one. Okay, waiting for like, maybe 2 more answers. If you've already submitted, good job. Great answer. I'm loving these. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and show them. Let me see if I can just pull up. Well, yeah, that's fine. Okay. Can everyone see the screen share? I haven't changed it yet. I'm just asking if you could see it before.
No,
I
it
can
says that you
see.
pause screen sharing.
I meant you could see everything before. I'm trying to think. So I'm asking, can you see the Zoom independent of the link, or are y'all looking at the Nearpod link?
No, yeah, when you were presenting earlier, we could see it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and resume it then. We'll just do it like this. This is what Mikey sent. Yeah, this is when the state kills people, and particularly minorities. That's obviously bad. This is something that's undemocratic, and we understand, though, that it is particularly inflamed under capitalism. Why, Mikey? Why is it that the state commits this kind of violence and repression on people under capitalism uniquely?
I've just forgotten everything.
Because they hate poor people and black people because they don't like them.
Yeah, but why? Like what about like poor people and minorities in particular among the poor? Like what generates that hatred?
It's a really good scapegoat away from the actual upper class, like capitalists. Really great scapegoat.
Like, um, I don't know, the
Yeah.
like state criminalizes being poor, and then they arrest you for doing the thing that they criminalize. I can't.
Yeah, no, those are answers. That works. Okay, let's look at another one. Sam was saying they bail out large banks, ignoring small community banks. Yeah. And why is that undemocratic, Sam? Like, why is that specifically undemocratic to bail out large, too big to fail banks as opposed to small community banks?
Well, essentially, you got like community credit, like unions and stuff, right? The community's putting their money into that, so it's essentially, a communal credit union, like K-State Credit Union. You're all putting your money together, taking it out, etc. Whereas bailing out these large banks, these large like U.S. Bank, etc., too big to fail, it's because they've got lobbyists and money going to their pockets from them. They feel the need that, well, these guys matter way more than this bank where these guys are losing money. So, fuck those guys, I guess, but these guys are chill.
Yeah. And yeah, and there's another one. So Sarah says the draft and deportations. So Sarah, why is the draft undemocratic?
I feel like a better, like, I mean, how is it not undemocratic? You know what I mean? You're forcing people to do something against. They're forcing people to like kill other people or potentially be killed for a government.
It's not even like we've ever been allowed to like vote on if we go to war. So like,
Yeah, I mean, think about this more recently. I think that in there's criticism of countries like the USSR and China for in the past having kind of not necessarily draft-like systems the way the United States did for Vietnam, but certainly similar systems for encouraging and somewhat drafting individuals for war, especially in the USSR when fighting the Nazis. So these systems do exist within socialist experiments. The question, though, is what about the draft in the United States makes it so undemocratic, makes it so unnecessarily undemocratic? And I think the answer that you all gave is that it is in particular for wars that we don't agree with, right?
Yeah.
For wars that we didn't choose to fight. There's no, this was made decisions by people who, are way, way above us and have like social power and, capital and ownership and make those decisions for their interests and reasons. For example, I know people are mentioning like going to war with Iran or, supporting the genocide in Israel. Those are things that like are forwarded by the capitalist class in their interests. And that's what makes it so undemocratic is because a few people, these few billionaires that exist across the world, make a majority of the decisions and that affect millions of lives and, no real consent from the public. So that's why like more and more executive power is being enshrined in the president in order to perform war actions. I mean, Congress hasn't declared war since I'm pretty sure Vietnam and Korea, and yet we have gone to war how many times? Like, are we really going to say, did we ever declare? We never declared war on Afghanistan.
We never declared war on Vietnam or Korea either.
There you go. See, that's
Japan was the last one.
This is my thing is like Congress has not approved war in so long, yet we still have. And one other thing to think about the draft is we don't need the draft anymore so much, not just because of precision warfare, but think about this. We don't need the draft because the economy does it for us. Those who are poor seeking opportunities, like, for example, education or social safety nets, I mean, they go to the military to access things like the GI Bill or access free healthcare or access a stable set of employment. It's go to the military or die. And the military is also is genuinely a jobs guarantee. It is that if you are able-bodied enough, at the very least, and you can join the military based on the minimum requirements, cool. You now have a set career path that you do not have to think about, and it is a guarantee of a job, pay, and benefits. Even though those pay and benefits are shitty, it's still something. So that's something I wanted to mention. And deportation is obviously undemocratic because of the stuff that we've been watching over the last few weeks about how Trump is clearly just like sending political opponents out of the country just because and without due process. Those things are obviously undemocratic.
You also can't buy yourself out of the draft in like the USSR, anything like that. The US is pretty unique in the fact that you can just buy your way out.
Yeah, exactly. So great. This next claim is the rich deserve their profits. I included this meme because I thought I think it's funny, but I think it kind of speaks to the core part of this claim. The reason that this claim is usually proffered is because they are assuming, as Mark Fisher describes in the book Capitalist Realism, definitely go read that book if you haven't yet, it's that we naturalize this idea that capitalists, deserve everything that they got and that they are there for a reason. This is the genius trope. This is the innovator trope, the entrepreneur trope, the understanding of, say, for example, Jeff Bezos started Amazon in his garage. It's like, yeah, his garage and a pretty sizable loan and inheritance from his family and well-supported, businessman father and a lot of other things that had to fall into place. He also, you can watch documentaries about this, like knew a bunch of people and whatnot, to make his way up in the system. So irrespective of the kind of natural state of understanding the rich as owning and a lot of their wealth, and then of course deserving it as a result of capitalist ideology. So what exactly about this claim can we come to as a response as socialists in a way that both diffuses the claim and shows kind of what socialism is? Well, I think this particularly ties to the labor theory of value. That if you don't understand what exploitation is, what surplus value is, and what, wages and why depression of wages is so harmful, then you really can't address this claim of the rich deserve their profits, because this is the fundamental philosophical notion of socialism, is that if, for example, the rich deserved all the wealth that they had, then why would socialism ever be a good idea? Okay, given all of that, and I know that most people got to watch at least the first couple of videos that were in the reading list, I have a little activity. So go ahead and for this activity, draw a diagram that, to your knowledge, explains Marx's labor theory of value. Make it simple, but go ahead, draw, add text to it, make it look cool. I'll give you all a couple of minutes to do that.
I'm about to text all this. I can't draw shit.
Same. And this is also the part that I didn't really understand. So, hold on.
That's good. That's good. Okay, just another minute. Try to finish up.
I don't know how you. Oh, never mind.
Okay, I'm seeing some of the images, so they're looking quite good. Hmm, interesting. Okay. Okay. Then we're gonna go ahead and pause the drawing. I'm gonna share the screen share, and it'll also come up on all of your devices in just a moment. So I'm gonna pick the one that. Okay. This one is the one that best represents what I was hoping to talk about, and clearly Mikey watched the videos. So in in this explanation, it's shown in this kind of bar chart. You can see there's, you know what? I'm not going to explain this. Mikey, you explain this. You show me what you drew.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is value, and then the red bit is the worker's wages, which the worker takes home, and then the blue bit is the profit or stolen value that the worker produced. And the key aspect is that the whole value would have been impossible without the worker. So it's kind of all the worker's value, but that's the key bit.
Why is the whole value not possible without the worker?
Because that textile mill isn't going to run itself, you know.
Okay. And then tell me a little bit more about workers' wages versus stolen value. I mean, the capitalist did sign a contract with you. They signed a contract and said, we will pay you this much for doing this much work. Why do you call it stolen value?
Because I hate the capitalists.
That's
Well,
one reason, yeah.
As we previously established, the whole value would have been impossible without your labor. And so in that way, the value of the labor has been stolen, like half of it or more than half of it usually has been stolen from you. Yeah. Obviously we can operate without the capitalists. Capitalists can't operate without us. Somebody's got to make those mistakes, you know.
I'll get into more specifics later. Would anyone be willing to have me share their image, and then explain where they think they got it wrong or where they think they got it right?
I had a
Like,
really good straw man plan. I didn't get to finish it.
You can
yes.
You can show
It's
mine.
there. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me do that real quick.
Although there's nothing wrong with it. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
Okay, Sarah. Tell me more about this. What's going on?
So the worker made a chair, and then he gives it to his boss with a monocle and a big hat, and then that guy sells it for like a lot of profit and doesn't really give, like, he didn't do anything to get this chair made other than, I guess, tell that person to make the chair, and then he gets all of the money that is made by selling the chair, and then he tells him to make more chairs, please, so I can do that again.
Okay. And so why is it then, because I think that you've pointed out something good as well, is like Mikey is saying that the factory does not run without the workers. So why is it that you say that the capitalist didn't do anything and then still got to sell the chair for all that money?
Well, because he didn't. Like, he did not contribute any, like, actual labor into making that chair. He, like, I guess the only thing he might have done is put the money up front so that you can get the chairs, but, like, he didn't make the materials. Yeah, Sarah has read Capital Volume 1. Thank you, Nick. But yeah.
So that's the interesting thing, right? You say the capitalist has bought the materials and maybe set up the factory. The capitalist owns the means of production, right? He owns the tools that are necessary to, make all of those things. He owns a lot of the forces of production, and those things. But why does that not entitle the capitalist to all of the extra value that happens when he sells the chair?
I mean, it just, in my mind, it doesn't make sense that he should get that, because, like, just because you put the money up front does not mean that you get to keep all, because it's not just you. There are other people that help this chair come to existence.
So yeah, there's a couple of things. First is that Marx in Capital describes how the commodity gets formed. The commodity comes from raw resources, which you say the capitalist bought and brought to the factory and exists there. Now, granted, he didn't bring it to the factory. Some logistics worker that also gets paid a wage, brought it to the factory. But aside, simplifying some of these nuances, very simply, the raw materials exist, the tools and the means of production exist, and then the actual worker itself exists, and the capitalist has organized the worker and the tools and the resources in the same place and then produces what is the commodity. Marx says that the commodity does not exist until a human labors those resources through the tools into a commodity. So given that, the commodity is now a new thing that has been developed as opposed to the raw resources that existed before, because we know that a chair sells for more than the wood that it is made of. And it certainly sells for more than the wood that it is made of, in part because the price of the wood does not match the price of the sale of the chair. So where does that value come from? And Marx says that the value comes from the labor time, the labor hours that the worker put into making that chair. Even if it's assisted by tools or productivity increases or whatever, that doesn't really matter as much. What matters is that the chair itself was made by a person who turned it into a commodity that can now be sold. So while yes, iron is a commodity technically because it's a resource that gets traded around or whatever, but the mining of that iron required the like necessary labor of the workers, going to work at mining the iron such that it could be sold and all of those things. So I think what your diagram is like not inaccurate in this sense. I think it's great. One thing that I might add to it, and this is something that the bar graph allows, is it gets to show the rate of exploitation. This is what Marx describes as the level of harm that capitalism is doing on each of the workers. The rate of the exploitation changes in proportion to the amount of value stolen by the capitalist. So when you say the capitalist does steal from the worker, it's because Marx fundamentally believes that labor is what creates all that extra value and that you were the one who put in that labor. So why do you not get the spoils? Essentially, the spoils go to the capitalist because he thinks he deserves it first. And this is another thing too, and I liked that you added this, Sarah, is that other people are involved in that process of production too. That when you work at McDonald's, like you may have put the buns together on the burger, but you didn't necessarily cook all the patties. You didn't necessarily, fry all the fries or the chicken nuggets that all go into the order, or even pour the drinks or take the order, or, work as a cashier or whatever. All of those things are broken up in different parts of production that go into making that good. And all those people labor matter in making that good. But even then, the system would not work. Capitalists would not have an income if they paid all of their workers all the value that they create. And as Mikey said, the factory doesn't exist without the workers. So that was quite a bit. We're going to move on to kind of the next discussion question. Does anyone have questions about that section, like the labor theory of value and kind of how to defend it as why capitalists don't deserve their money? Okay. Checking chat. Yeah, what about the real rate and the falling rate of profit? This is something that we will probably address in the future. I'll just like briefly address it here, is that Marx does say that the falling rate of profit is inevitable under capitalism, that like eventually you'll get production to the point where you're making millions of shares an hour, and essentially that the profit that you can get from each individual share, both from the negotiation. No, it's all good. It's all good. That essentially workers can bargain as much as they want for higher and higher wages, and that the price of a good will eventually fall. So this causes a crisis. It's a contradiction. This is part of why it's true that like the owning class doesn't necessarily own these things, because let's be real. If it were possible for the owning class to basically be written out of society by the process of just profit going down, then why are they necessary? Laborers are always necessary. We knew that during the COVID pandemic. Once they became sick or unable to work, now we have a problem of not being able to produce goods. But what happened when Jeff Bezos got sick? Basically nothing. Like Jeff Bezos getting sick, basically nothing. Trump getting sick, basically nothing. That's some of the big keys.
Literally nothing.
Yeah. If all of the billionaires in the world like died tomorrow, nothing changes. Like fundamentally nothing changes.
Plot of Atlas Shrugged, and this is why I want to write Atlas Shrugged fan fiction, where they just like the workers are like doing socialism, and then the like billionaires are like killing each other. Anyways.
Okay, and we already did what Marx and socialists think exploitation looks like under capitalism. The last key is that super exploitation exists. So this is different. I know y'all didn't get always the chance to like really understand the videos. So the big concept of super exploitation is just that you're right that if you increase wages and then therefore take up more of the share of the value that you produce in a given hour, then technically you'll have reduced your exploitation. But what happens when you and the worker next to you, say you are, for example, a more well-off white worker in a farm field, next to the migrant worker for the same amount of work, for the same amount of production, for the same amount of stuff, will get paid half as much as you. You were doing the same thing. You'd make the same amount of product. Why is it that this worker is getting paid less? Well, you could say that the migrant worker has not negotiated for the right wages and didn't sign the right contract. What Marx says is that this is, what socialist theorists have said is that this super exploitation, that difference between you, the white, more privileged worker, versus workers in the global south, migrant workers, and things like that, are considered super exploitation. It's the difference between the actual sort of real wages, the average wages of that position in the economy, and what your exploited wage looks like in comparison to that. So technically, you could have a bunch of workers that like negotiate for higher wages and see less exploitation, but their fellow workers in that same workplace might not see those benefits. For example, racialized or otherwise gendered workers might not see those benefits. So that's super exploitation. Okay, that's the last bit of explanation I hopefully have to do, and then the rest of this should be easy. Okay, discussion questions. Let's see, do I have any left? Oh, what about the right to what we create? So I think I want to touch on this last, and I want y'all to provide some defenses of it. Essentially, capitalists will come up to you and they will say, wait a second, but the farmer who employs all those migrant workers and exploits them, he's the one who bought the tractor on loan. He's the one who owned the land. He's the one who bought the seed and organized production and made plans for spraying and tells the workers what to do. Why is that not deserving him the share of profits that he takes from all the workers doing the work? Like, it's not just his ideas, but like he literally, like, he does stuff, you know, he gets in a tractor, he does stuff too. What do we tell that businessman as socialists?
Because like the actual profit comes from the people doing the work and not him organizing it. Like, he could organize the crap out of a whole business, but if he doesn't have any workers to actually do the physical work, then like there's no profit being made.
Ideas don't make
like,
you money, people do. Yeah.
But like, I mean, like the work, there is work in managing operations, and like that work can be paid, but like the idea of like owning things is not work. So you can have like things that you do to operate a business that like, yeah, like you're doing a job, but like also you don't deserve the profit on top of the stuff that you like you didn't do, you know.
Sure. I think this relates to the last thing that I wanted to speak on for this subject, which is in particular taxation. So in this section of ABCs of Socialism, where it talks about, well, don't the rich deserve their money? In the very bottom, it talks about a socialist program for taxation. Now, did anyone read this section and have any like questions or comments about like socialist taxation? Did you largely agree? Did you largely disagree? I'm ready to hear like kind of general thoughts before I move on with my actual question.
This was another section that, I'm gonna be honest, I was a little bit confused about.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah.
What was the, like, do you know what the confusion was? Was it just like it was kind of hard to get the moving parts? What's the
I'm gonna pull it up again. So
By all
Do a nice little image, by the way. It's really good.
What?
What does exploitation look like? Oh, a whiteboard.
Yeah, I spent my time drawing a great image.
Yeah,
I finally got
we
the
should
drawing
show
hands
that.
out.
Yeah, I got a really great drawing too.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah, these are actually kind of some decent images. I am not showing them, but like these are some decent images. Well, this one's fine. This one's fine. I can show this one. This is good. Yeah, I like this. Thank you,
Yeah,
Stan.
they're really mean to the global south for some reason.
Yeah.
But we're all exploited anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Phew, excuse me.
I'll even share it with the class.
I can't believe
Nick says tax is theft. We will burn the IRS office down. Okay.
Yeah, brother.
Nick, you can check this, but like why? why is tax theft? And I know he's joking about this. The meme that Nick is getting at is what's talked about in the ABCs of Socialism, that capitalists will often say that taxation is theft from them in particular, that it takes the value that they were generating and rightfully should have had. So, Sarah, were you able to read through that section again?
I not all the way yet.
Okay, take your time. Was there anyone else who wanted to provide comments while Sarah's taking a look?
I can't believe you won't show my picture. My picture is great.
Not dude.
My picture is amazing.
I don't know what's the thing on the top.
It's the wheel that's crushing you.
Do you know what that looked like?
No.
No, not the wheel. Okay, I'm not doing this. Not right now.
What is this? This is discrimination. Hold on. This is an image of a famous political cartoon.
Well, if you pull up the political cartoon, I'll show the political cartoon. I just can't tell what that image says, and I'm not putting it up on YouTube.
Oh.
While that's happening,
really good drawing for my MacBook standards. So this has been. I can't believe I did it.
I wanted to mention about taxation just kind of broadly that this claim that businesses sort of deserve all of the wealth that they generate, or at least claim to generate, is why they resist taxation schemes. This is why, for example, taxing the rich is something that Trump will never do, but he will tax the middle class and then lie to them afterward. In part because the rich thinks that taking any number of profits is good, and the government taking any of those profits is necessarily bad. I think there's an argument being made in this article from the ABCs of Socialism about why socialists care about taxation so much. So could anyone tell me why they think socialists care about taxation so much? Particularly tax the rich?
I sent you the image in Discord, Daniel.
Oh yeah. Now I see what your image was supposed to represent, but I don't think you intended it to look like that. The way it does.
Referring to.
That's fine. But can anyone answer my question?
What was your question again?
Why is it the socialists are so interested in taxation, particularly taxing?
Because it's redistributing the wealth, not necessarily in a democratic way, but if we tax the rich, then that money can be used for everybody, theoretically.
Okay. Yeah. And then why is it do you think then, Sarah, after kind of rereading that section, do you think that is something that we as socialists should make a primary part of our program if we are to transition away from capitalism?
You mean taxing the rich or taxes in general?
Yeah, like a strong tax the rich kind of deal.
I mean, yeah.
I don't think.
But why?
I don't know.
Okay, Mikey, why you say no?
I'm saying no because whatever you tax, whatever your source of the government source of income is, has to keep being there. So for example, the state hospitals are reliant on smoking tobacco companies because of the class action lawsuit. They're reliant on tobacco companies to keep paying that lawsuit, that settlement, even though we would like there to be no tobacco companies, for example. And in the same way, if we were to tax the billionaires and fund our government based on billionaires, there would have to keep being billionaires, so we couldn't kill them. So in that way, it would. There's other economic policies. Well, economic policies it's socialism. Socialism is not taxing people, taxing billionaires specifically, because like obviously socialism is like more than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, one of the things that you're kind of calling to is like taxation is key because it runs government services, and but also that like the government the companies do depend on like government services, and companies both depend on each other. They are interdependent, as Mikey was saying, in some ways. Like tobacco companies produce a lot of smoke that creates, businesses for the healthcare industry, but the healthcare industry gets subsidized by the government. The government needs taxes in order to subsidize the healthcare industry. This like cycle that happens. One annotation that I made in the book was that Walmart is the biggest beneficiary of WIC and SNAP benefits. If you've never heard that statistic, it is widely reported and confirmed that because Walmart employs some of the poorest workers in America, and a large majority of them, they also happen to be their employees happen to be the biggest recipients of WIC and SNAP benefits, which is interesting. Why is it that the people who work at Walmart cannot afford on their own wages to shop at the very store that they work at? That's like the fundamental aspect of exploitation there. Mikey.
Clarify by what I meant, because there was a class action lawsuit in the 1990s that said that the tobacco companies had to pay healthcare, state healthcare for the next 25 or 30 years, and that money is now funding is what that healthcare relies on, not the relationship between tobacco smoking getting you in the hospital. Like it's a very specific relationship.
Sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, that relationship is important too, as the like checking back against the harms of the tobacco industry is like necessary and why we need taxation. So if we think about it from a socialist perspective, both it is for providing government services, but we also want to think about this from a class perspective. If, for example, we understand the government as an agent of the interests of the working class, then government taxes are collected as a means of redistributing the stolen value from workers. If you think about it, the taxes come out of profits the capitalists normally would have taken. Therefore, those taxes are redistributing that wealth into public services. So that's essentially why the socialist program of taxes is so important, and why so many people are like tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich as the key gateway issue for things like thinking about socialism. That's why Bernie Sanders says we need to tax the rich, we need to end the oligarchy, and then we'll go fund a war in Israel. Like that's kind of his stick.
That was a really good impression. That was a really good Bernie impression.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I've been practicing my old white man for a long time. So anyway, I think the real deal here is that yes, socialist taxation is important, and it is something that we need to educate on, and is a good way to talk about like why exploitation happens. Like why is the government collecting taxes, and why would we minimize taxes so much that it harms public services? Like for example, clean water and clean air. Those are things that most people don't like to compromise on, and when they realize that those things are something they're compromising on by voting for capitalists and voting for capital interests, then it's a problem. So those are the last things I wanted to address there, and I'll go ahead and show real quick the thing. There you go. You can see the political cartoon that Mikey was referencing earlier. This is from the Pullman strikes. This is the railroad workers who were striking at like the time in I think 1830, 1930. I can't remember exactly which time period it was. Was it 1830? Oh, Mikey, you got to unmute. Here.
It was definitely like the late 1800s, probably like the 1880s or 1890s.
Oh yeah, it's 1894. There we go.
Yeah, I'm always right.
I'm a socialist. I don't read, so it's fine.
Doesn't read, doesn't know anything.
Yeah. Okay, so we can return back to the Nearpod. Okay. Here's a little mini kind of break claim so that I can talk a little bit less and you can hear some more memes. This is a really good TikTok video that you may have seen between XQC and Hassan Piker, where they did like a like co-stream. And XQC is a capitalist. He runs his own business and is very pro-capitalist. And Hassan Piker is obviously not. So it's interesting to see this dynamic. The claim here is that capitalists take all the risk, therefore they deserve the rewards.
Ultimately,
worst example. What about the people who take a risk, who put in some of their money and take a risk? They have an idea.
Great.
They have I'm gonna make this for.
The idea that the boss took a risk always forgets that the worker is also taking a risk. And the funniest part about as a whisk, like a wabbit, a silly wabbit. You want to know what the biggest risk that the factory owner has, though? Is to be relegated to being a worker again. Because when you lose all your money in a business, they don't put you in jail. They don't kill you. They don't kill your family. They don't do any of those things. You just have to go back to work and be a worker one more time. And the bosses know that they never treat the workers well, which is why that is the major reason as to why they never want to default, and that's why they constantly advocate for the system that they set in place. Ultimately,
very simple. If capitalists take all the risk, then why is it that the workers face the risk of literally dying when they are no longer in their jobs? Why is it that losing jobs is one of the biggest reasons why divorce happens? Why is it that losing your job is one of the biggest reasons that people take their own lives or experience mental health crises and things like that? Why? It's because your situations drastically change. Whereas, some of these effects, like especially mental health effects, can happen for small business owners, and they often will pour a lot of their personal finances into their business. So I don't want to discount a lot of that. I think Hassan is kind of glazing over much of that to kind of talk about the Jeff Bezoses of the world. But even for those who took out loans to support their businesses, they default on the loans, go into bankruptcy, and then become the average wage worker. They don't go to prison or die unless they did something illegal in the process to, make all that wealth and make that happen. Go ahead, Mikey.
Yeah, the petite bourgeois are in a precarious situation because they're not bourgeois, they're just bourgeois. So, there is risk for them, but it's not really comparable to the risk that the worker takes on. And in the same way, workers also take on risk on the job often enough and literally die on the job, injured on the job, long-term chronic injuries during their jobs, all these kinds of things. So I don't see the capitalist taking on those kinds of risks.
Sarah, do you see capitalists taking on that kind of risk?
No. This burn mark right here is from working at a deli. I don't see my manager having a burn mark because he was never back there with the cookers. That's all I'm gonna have to say.
There you go. Okay. The last claim we're going to address, and I wanted to address that one quickly just because I think we all kind of get it after having our long discussion about labor and exploitation. There was a section technically in the reading of the new reader that I sent about how socialism is not natural or that capitalism is natural. In opposite, that the socialism doesn't work because it's against our human nature. You can read that in the Jacobin book about that. Are there any questions that we have about human nature in particular? Either that socialism doesn't work because we're all greedy people, or that socialism doesn't work because no one would ever work without a incentive, the profit motive.
I don't have any questions. I just fundamentally disagree. So
yeah.
If people don't do things without getting paid, why am I making socks right now?
Exactly. People do labor all the time, when there's not a incentive.
A profit incentive.
Yeah, if no profit incentive, then no arts and crafts. Essentially is what they're saying. There's also a good example of open source development of projects. Open source development of software projects is a great way to know that communities are doing things just because they want to. Hell, half of the games that have been on Nintendo systems over the last couple of decades have been basically their code has been found out. They've cracked the code, figured out what the actual original code was to kind of learn what those algorithms were and how they made those games originally. And they literally did all of this just because no one paid them to crack the code. In fact, they tried to prevent it. But if you reverse engineer the code or you put it through some kind of other software, then it's totally legal. So, those kinds of projects are good examples of how people will do things, even though it's against their nature, their greedy nature. Having some simple, quick examples you can pull up about why it may not be against people's nature, or why being collective, communal, doing things with and among each other is a good way to respond to this argument. Okay, the last claim. Communists are here to take all your stuff away. This meme says capitalism makes people unequally rich. Communism makes people equally poor. What do we have to say about this meme first? Like, is this true? Is this not true? What do we think?
This meme uses block letters, so I think it's authoritative on the subject.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But for real, capitalism makes people unequally rich. Communism makes people equally poor. True, not true? Where are we at?
Well, the first part is true. The second part,
Solid.
like, I would just like take out the poor part and the like communism makes people equal.
like LY, communism
Yeah.
makes people equal.
Yeah. I do want to connect that though. The underlying assumption is that by making people equally poor, it's like communists come to your house and they take your Tesla. Communists come to your house, and well, I mean maybe because the whatever Elon car, but communists come to your house and take your car, your only car. They come to your house and they take your dolls. They take your I don't know, the trim on the staircase. They take the paintings that you have inside your house. Because why do you need paintings? You don't need paintings. You only need images of the supreme leader. Those kinds of things. That's how people genuinely imagine communism.
The
So-
trim on the staircase.
Yeah. They take the paint off your walls. You don't need paint in socialism. So, but that's another example of how like they'll construct a caricature of socialism and then make you respond to it. So the first question I have is multiple choice. So feel free to take a little quiz on your thing. The first question is, does anyone have a natural right to private property?
No. Jesus says no, so I'm gonna say no.
Good one, Mikey.
Where
And then the second question, because I'm no longer here, is where does private property originate?
Daniel, your microphone is acting up.
My what?
your microphone.
It's bad.
Okay, what about now?
Okay, that's better.
Okay, thanks. Sometimes it happens with these headphones. Okay. It looks like we got answers from everybody. Wow. Okay. So I'm actually really intrigued by these answers. I will just go through the second question. I'll briefly cover the first. The first was, does an innate right to private property exist? The answer is no, because the whole point of private property is that you have social control. You have control over your fellow man because you own property. That's a problem. Just because you own a car doesn't mean you necessarily control your neighbors. That's not how that works. But you certainly control your neighbors if you own the factory. So that's just the answer to that question, since everyone got it right. The second question that we have to consider is the question about where does private property originate. They had three answers available: were agriculture, industrialization, and I think some random C answer that two of you chose.
I chose the C answer originally because it's true. Like, I mean, not like it's B Elon's boyfriend, right?
Yes.
The essence of that is like be buddy buddy with people that are already powerful. But then I changed my answer to B after because
Yeah. So essentially the reason why you all are answering like industrial factory production as opposed to agriculture is because you're thinking about private property within the system of capitalism. But I wanted to expand the view a little bit, and because it was answered differently, I think it's important to recognize that when you watch the video about Engels's history on private property, right, he is talking about private property in the context of, in particular, inheritance. When he writes the history of the private property, the family, and the state, he writes about how when we transformed into agricultural society, it then became possible for you to own a thing like a till and a bull and a house and those kinds of things that are like stable and static. But in particular, owning the means of production, right? Owning the till that you use to till the land is something that sets you apart from your neighbors. Your ability to do that kind of labor sets you apart from them. And then, systems developed like matrilineal versus patrilineal descent. So descent from the mother or descent from the father. Before it was descent from the mother, because the only way you could prove who was your parent was because your mom literally birthed you. There's no proof that your dad actually was, your dad. And in that case, when, men become the primary utilizers of things like the till, the bull, the ox, those kinds of things, they then become owners somehow of that property. Systems societies start developing to enfranchise men to own and then pass down that property. So truly, agricultural society is what allows private property as even a notion to exist. Why would hunter-gatherer societies ever think of something as private property? Locke and Hobbes and some other Enlightenment philosophers might say that property is an innate right because you own you, and then by extension, you own the stuff that makes you you, or allows you to do the things that you want to do. But this is flawed in the sense that Engels is describing, that we used to be able to do ourselves, like that we used to be able to do the things that made us, without the notion of private property, without the notion of inheritance or things like that. And so what changed? The answer is that we developed the ability to control society and make society in whatever image you would like to make it in, based on the property that is owned by the dominant class. And so this is where class society develops from, is from this agricultural society. Now, do we have questions, comments, examples, or thoughts on that section in particular? Okay. Great. So with that as the foundation, what's this next thing? Here we go. This discussion board. Now we're going to talk about the difference between private property and personal property. The question specifically you should be thinking about this is, what gives private property its distinct character? So I want you all to first find an example from the text if you can. If you can't find an example from the text, that's fine. Just give me an example or write something out about what makes private property distinct. This would be the section on communists are going to take my Kenny Loggins records. Which, great section. Is anyone else going to get their responses in? Mikey, are you finding quotes in the text? No.
I think are you just typing?
Yeah, Mikey's just typing.
Okay.
Will, do you have any quotes from the text or examples that you want to provide on the board? You can also chat them if you'd like. Okay. So I won't show this, but I'll mention someone says private property means the person who owns it has social power over others, which is great. I think I have heard some Oh, exploitation is a good example. So private property is distinct because it allows capitalists to do things like exploitation and set up class society. The last thing I might want to address here is what makes private property distinct as well is not just that it provides social power, but like why is it distinct from personal property? So can we think of an example of personal property that is definitely not private property? And then you can just shout these out, put them in the chat, whatever.
My squishmallows. You
There you
can't
go.
see them, but
Perfect.
my toothbrush. The toothbrush is. I feel like that's everyone always is like, you have your toothbrush and you got your toothbrush factory. Like, I've seen like 20 TikToks about that. Anyway.
No, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's a valid answer. But...
Genuinely, the communists do not want to take your Harry Potter books because why would the library want to keep Harry Potter books?
I think the communists are going to take the Harry Potter books just because we don't like them.
There you go. Yes, yes. The communists are totally for book banning.
We're
100%.
a little bit of book banning just for fun.
Yeah.
We're banning Ayn Rand. We were banning Atlas Shrugged. It's an awful book, and it should be banned.
Possibly. But I do want to talk about the like real fear that people have that they think of when they think of the dictatorship of the proletariat, when they think of communism, when they think of communist governments. They think of like Mao rolling through the hills and killing landlords, and they fear that Mao is targeting them. They have been convinced that when, communists target the ultra rich and target the corrupt and target the wealthy and other political opponents as well, that they are coming for the average everyday person. And the answer is that's not true. They are not coming for your Kenny Loggins records. They are not coming for your Harry Potter books, even though they may suck. Because even if they banned those things, they just have no real interest in coming into your house and burning them. You know who has? The capitalist aligned fascists across the world, including in the United States and elsewhere. So, given those examples, we can understand that under capitalism, personal property gets taken away a lot more. I mean, think about it. If you're in debt, what do you think gets taken away first? Your car, your house, all the shit that you own. You become homeless. You literally become homeless. You lose access to your clothes, your safe lodging, and all those other things that a communist would not only not take away from you, but more likely provide to you directly and say, if you don't have a house, here is one. If you don't have personal property and a life to build on, that's great. We will make sure that you have the means to be able to do that. So even though that existence may not be the most beautiful and perfect existence, it may not be opulent, it may not be pretty, it may not be super, super fun, it's certainly better than the alternative of being homeless and living on the street, for example. I mean, think, for example, that like some greater than 15% of the US population are below the poverty line. Why? Like, why is that true in a country like ours? Now, granted, you can check my figures or whatever. I'm sure the number is possibly higher in many places, but it's certainly unfortunate that that's the case. And what we're worried about, like, I don't know, having cyber trucks, like that's what we're concerned about. It's definitely. Yeah, I know you're. I know you're concerned about.
I hate those cars more than all others.
Sure. But
like number one priority, getting rid of them.
Number one priority, getting rid of Cybertrucks. No, we just have to remember that, like, as socialists, our priority is to make sure that everyone like has the things that they need to survive and whatnot. That we need to go a lot further. Oh, here we go. I totally forgot the John Rogers quote that was published here. William says, there are two novels that can change a 14-year-old's life, The Lord of the Rings and Atlas Shrugged. One is a childish fantasy, and the other is about a socially crippled adulthood. Awesome. But yeah, essentially that regardless, the communists are not there to take stuff from you. They're there to give you the social safety nets and whatnot. And if we want to explore this topic a little bit further, I got some cool videos. Okay, so generally we've come to the conclusion that communists are not here to take your Kenny Loggins records. But what is socialism then? How can we retort with not just a no that isn't, but rather a this is what socialism is? Here is socialism explained by ducks.
Socialism, explained by ducks. Duck grows 10 tomatoes. Next duck grows 2. Another duck grows none, but tried real hard. Ducks gather, say, hey, maybe we help each other. So no duck goes hungry. Goose appear, say, each duck gives a few tomatoes. We make big tomato pile. Ducks get free pond school, free nest care, free worm soup when sick. Ducks still grow their own stuff, still keep most of it, but chip in a few worms to help other ducks. Goose makes sure every duck gets the basics. Even if their farm had a bad season. Ducks say, but I grew more. Goose say, yes, and you still have more. But you're not the only duck in the pond. Ducks still own things, but share a little, so no duck sinks. Ducks fly together, pay taxes together, get benefits together. Some ducks grumble, why help lazy ducks? But most ducks know, life is wobbly, and one bad worm year can happen to any duck. Ducks say, it's not perfect, but it's fairer than flying alone.
Okay, so that's socialism explained by ducks. What do we think? Is that video accurate, not accurate? Say it again, Mikey.
Oh, is the goose the vanguard? The
That's
vanguard party.
Yes, yes. The goose is the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that this is like a kind of decent explanation of what socialists are generally advocating for. Although there are critiques from my own like perspective on socialism, I think it's fair to say like that's what most people mean on the left when they talk about socialism. They just want to make sure that no one has the experience of being like homeless and destitute, right? That is not an experience we want for our fellow worker and for our like fellow organizer. That's not the experience we want for people. So, and that means all kinds of people, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, identity, and whatnot. We don't want that experience for them. So how can we set up society to prevent that from happening? This goes beyond social safety nets and says that we should not develop a system itself that creates those conditions to where it is necessary, where it always happens, that people are that poor or facing those experiences. Okay, now this is going to be a bit more divisive, but we have to remember that our critiques of socialism are not just going to come from the right. They will also come somewhat from the reactionary left. There are plenty of anti-communist socialists who think that communism is the dirty word of leftist thought, and that we can't think or conceive of communism because it is always bad or always violent and dictatorial, rather than understanding the the actual definitions of these terms or the actual realizations of those experiments. So let's watch this video to see what anti-communism looks like from the left.
Communism, explained by ducks. Duck grows 10 tomatoes. Next duck grows 0. First duck say, I worked hard for these. Second duck say, but I still need to eat. Goose arrive. Goose say, every duck gives what they can and takes what they need. All ducks agree. Share tomatoes, share worms, share nest building tools. No private ponds. Ducks own nothing. Goose own everything. Ducks take turns farming, take turns building. Everyone gets food. Everyone gets nests. But some ducks do more than others. Some ducks do nothing at all. Some ducks say, why work harder if worms are the same? Goose makes rules, decides who gets what, decides how many worms each duck gets. Ducks say, I want 5 worms. Goose say, you get 2. No rich ducks, no poor ducks, just ducks. Ducks say, it works if Goose is kind, but Goose not kind. Goose loves power. Goose say, yes.
Okay, what do we think about that? Like, what are our initial reactions, or what thoughts do we have about that video?
I think in a socialist government, if the duck started acting like that, there should be a way to overthrow the duck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, are these made by the same person?
Yes, the same account made both videos.
Yeah, I'm impressed at how they're like in the socialism video, they were like, oh, under socialism, they were like, they had a critique that was like, oh, but some ducks are lazy in the socialism video, but then in the communism video they're like, but some ducks are lazy and don't do anything, and it's like, compare, like they like contradict each other.
Yeah, no, that's a great point to make, because there's within left anti-communism, it is largely directed toward the kinds of caricatures that people have of socialist experiments, and then they are attacking once again those false ideas about those things, not the actual things as they were or as they are. So given that, we have to be prepared when we are defending socialism to defend accurate portrayals, do a scientific and rigorous approach to understanding history and the science of socialism, and then also be ready to have self-critique and develop those ideas more clearly, rather than relying on tropes of communism is when goose hate you, like communism is when goose take all your shit and give it to somebody else. Like that's the kind of like left anti-communism that pervades a lot of the left, and we have to be very careful about approaching that, and also have ways to respond to that.
I would also say that like as you can get very far on the left, and your anti-communism will still sound like almost exactly like a conservative's anti-communism, because I just see it as people who are like have stopped in the progression of their education, and they're like, oh, communism, you can't learn about that, I know what that is, I'm not gonna even look at that because we already know it's like dictatorial and that kind of thing. So that's why, and so it kind of, so they know it, of exactly the same amount about communism as like a fascist knows about communism. Maybe fascists know more about communism, I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's that internal inconsistency you just talked about. In the previous video, they were like, lazy workers still get benefits under socialism because they shouldn't experience like abject poverty. That's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so then you say in this video, oh, look at them criticizing and saying lazy workers are just lazy workers and they'll just get free shit and it's fine. Like, that is where the thinking, the actual like scientific process stops, and where the propaganda begins, where it's like, okay, wait a second. Lazy workers are fine in one context because at least they're lazy workers only in the socialist context. But somehow when they become a part of the communist context, they're not only freeloaders, but they're also necessarily also somewhat oppressed by the communist government, and they're also bad people. Like, where do we draw the line on why lazy workers are good under socialism but bad under communism, or at least not so bad under socialism? Like, what's the problem?
And also they folded in the critique of the government as like the state is doing communism. Like in the first one, it was like I love how we're dissecting this like 2-minute meme video. But anyways, in the first one,
that's socialist for you.
That's socialist for you. The goose was like showed up, and it wasn't like, and the like ducks were like, oh, cool, and went along with it. And then the second one, the goose shows up and they go along with it, but then the goose like inexplicably like turns evil, even though they're like the goose is doing the same thing in the second video really as it does in the first video of like redistributing the resources. But like for some reason in the second video, the goose wants like power. So it's almost like social communism is when socialism is bad,
Yeah. And also take a note of the property distinctions there. Can anyone tell me the moment where like the common, the common but flawed notion that like communism is when they take your Kenny Loggins records? Can you tell me where that appeared in this video that I just showed you? Or like, do you remember where that appeared?
Like taking the tomatoes and then like from the ducks, and then like the goose decides how many tomatoes everybody gets, let's say.
Yeah.
I think it's this clip.
But there's also, there is a bit where it's like, you just don't have anything.
Right there.
Yeah.
And so it's making this association that the communist government sort of owns everything. And I think this might be true in some contexts. Like It is true that the USSR largely was the sole provider of all goods in the market and the sole setter of prices and a command economy. And it is true that all the tomatoes and worms and sticks there were necessarily held by the USSR at some point in the process of distribution. But I think the thing that they're missing is that a lot of this distribution is done democratically as well. That there was a lot of input from workers' councils, there was a lot of input from communities on what they need and how they need it. This is the same as like mutual aid networks and even some charity organizations, although I'm not like recommending NGO charities as like a pathway to socialism. I'm just saying that communities often know what they need and can say a lot about what they need to even the central bodies that regulate it. So to just assume that it is like every person now gets instantly dispossessed of everything that could benefit them. And in the socialism example, you might even see there's like traces of greed there, where it says, no, don't worry. Under socialism, you get to keep some of the excess you produce so that you can live your lavish lifestyle. And you see a clip of one duck playing next to another duck, but like has a floaty in the pool instead. And it's like, yeah, your friend's not going to sink or drown, but you'll still be in your floaty and you get to flaunt your floaty next to them. It's kind of like an underlying notion that's playing in that video. Despite it describing socialism pretty well, it gets wrong a lot of these questions about human nature, where it assumes that we are like greedy, competitive creatures rather than the system sort of brings that out in us. Okay. Any last comments, final comments before we, move on? Great. Well, that is all I had for the session. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment.